Welcome to Caregiver Chats. I'm Dr. Lakelyn. Today I'm going to cover the signs and symptoms of Alzheimer's and dementia. So stay tuned and we'll get into it. Caregiver Chats is a podcast designed to help those caring for older adults find balance, support, resources, and encouragement. If you're caring for an aging family member or friend, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Dr. Lakelyn. I'm a gerontologist and caregiving advocate for Home Instead, an honor company. I know how busy caregivers are, and I'm so grateful that you're taking the time to listen. I also want to hear from you. Please email me your caregiving questions, and I plan to answer them on future episodes. My email is caregiverchats@homeinsteadinc.com. That's caregiverchats@homeinsteadinc.com. Last episode, I talked about the sandwich generation caregiver. This type of caregiver is sandwiched between multiple generations, caring for an aging family member, which is typically a parent, and their own children. If you find yourself in this sandwich situation, I'd encourage you to go back and listen. In today's episode, we're diving into the topic of the signs and symptoms of Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. A lot of times I get asked about the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia. And since September is World Alzheimer's Month, I thought this would be a great time to provide further insights into this topic. And let me tell you, there's a lot to share. First, I'm going to start by defining dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Then I'm going to talk about the 10 early signs and symptoms of Alzheimer's. I'll follow that with the 7 common dementia-related behaviors that we often see in these diseases as they progress. And then I saved the best for last. I'm going to end with some caregiver insights. There are 6 things that many former caregivers wish they would have known when they cared for a loved one with Alzheimer's or another type of dementia. So I am so excited to share those insights with you at the end of today's episode. So let's start out by defining some terms. So the first term that I want to clear up is dementia. The term dementia is actually an umbrella term for a set of symptoms that impact the brain in the areas of memory, thinking, and daily functioning. And there are many types of dementia that fall underneath that umbrella. There's Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body dementia, frontal temporal dementia, which is often referred to as FTD. There's vascular dementia, and then mixed types of dementia where a person might have multiple dementias. For example, Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia. But the reason you hear Alzheimer's disease talked about the most is because it's the most common form of dementia. It accounts for approximately between 60 and 80% of all dementia cases. You may find that Alzheimer's seems like a very random term to describe this disease, but it's actually named after Dr. Alice Alzheimer, who first described dementia in 1906. And while that seems like a long time ago, only in the past 20 to 30 years have researchers and scientists really started to better understand Alzheimer's disease. So let's dive in a little bit more on Alzheimer's disease specifically. It is a progressive disease, which means it slowly gets worse over time and interferes with a person's ability to carry out daily activities that affect things like language, memory, thinking abilities, their spatial awareness, and it can also cause personality changes. Research has found that Alzheimer's is likely caused by the accumulation of plaques and tangles in the brain, which really just means that these particles in the brain disrupt the communication between the neurons, and that's why you start to see a person experience symptoms. It's because the brain is starting to fail. The neurons, they can't talk to each other like they used to. So you might see a person start to become more forgetful. They might act differently or experience communication challenges. And they might also not be able to do things for themselves on their own, and they might need more support for things like basic activities of daily living. And I often get asked, are there various stages to the disease? And in general, there are 3 stages of Alzheimer's. Some people like to expand that out to 5, but for simplicity's sake, I like to keep it to 3. The first stage is often called early stage. This is when a person is still able to function pretty independently. They may need extra reminders or verbal or nonverbal cues. And if you talk to somebody in the early stage of dementia, they're often told, well, you don't look like you have dementia, or, well, you don't act like you have dementia. However, the family and the individual living with dementia are likely starting to notice changes, but again, it might not be noticeable to others. Then we have the middle stage of Alzheimer's disease. This is when you start to see more noticeable changes in the person's behavior. The individual will start to need more assistance with their daily routine and their care needs. In this stage, we also see more issues and challenges with communication. The person might have trouble following the conversation. They might take longer to process information and respond. And they may start to lose their ability to recall names of people or items. And then you have the third and final stage, the late stage, where a person will experience more decline in their physical health. They're likely losing their ability to walk and become bedridden. They also will have difficulty eating and swallowing. And in this stage, the person's ability to communicate is pretty limited, and they may no longer be able to verbally express themselves. And since there's no cure at this point in time, a person will eventually pass away from the complications of Alzheimer's disease. I think it's important for caregivers to understand that someone can live with Alzheimer's or another type of dementia for years or even decades. Often people will ask me, how long will my loved one be in stage 1, 2, or 3? And it's hard to tell because everyone's situation is so different. But what I do know is that often the caregiving journey is a marathon, not a sprint. It happens over the course of many years. And so often I see a dementia caregiving journey experience caregiver creep. And I talk about caregiver creep in the very first episode of Caregiver Chats. And what that means is that the caregiving role kind of creeps up on you over time. And so often in stage 1 of the disease, a person might need just a little bit of light assistance that the caregiver might start to help with. And then as they progress into stage 2, that support that they provide grows to help more so with everyday activities and also with things like personal care, bathing, grooming, restroom assistance. And then they get to stage 3, and the person is usually at that point not safe to be left alone and needs some sort of 24/7 care or monitoring. And just like it sounds, the amount of care creeps up over time. And that's why it's really, really important for caregivers to look into resources and supports and for them to create a care team to come alongside them on this often very long journey. Again, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So now that we know the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's disease, it's really important for all of us to know and understand the early signs and symptoms of Alzheimer's so that we can encourage a visit to a healthcare provider early on if we start to see someone exhibit those symptoms that I'm about to cover. The Alzheimer's Association notes 10 specific early signs and symptoms of Alzheimer's disease that should not be ignored. And I've linked to an article about this in the show notes. If you see a pattern in any of these signs, or if you see sudden changes in cognition, a healthcare visit is so important. Here are the 10 signs. So number 1 is memory loss that disrupts daily life. It's normal to sometimes forget names or where we put the keys. It happens to me all the time, but we often end up remembering later on. But those that are living with dementia or Alzheimer's, they don't end up remembering later on. It's when this memory loss starts to interrupt their daily life, that's where it's cause for concern. And some kind of cues as to when this might be happening might be things like lots of sticky note reminders around the house, maybe on bathroom mirrors, on the calendar. Also relying even more heavily on their smartphone devices to recall people's names or times and events. The second sign of Alzheimer's and other types of dementia is challenges in planning or problem solving. A person might not be able to plan an activity or solve problems like they used to. For example, those that are still working, they might start to notice changes at work. They might have more trouble keeping up at meetings. They might not be able to make the numbers add up in spreadsheets. So again, if it's something that they were always able to do and now are having challenges with that planning and problem solving, that's when it's cause for concern. The number 3 sign is difficulty completing familiar tasks. Kind of goes along with what we just talked about. We do so many daily tasks without thinking twice about it. I mean, just think about your morning routine. I got up this morning, I probably brushed my teeth the same way, put the same leg into my pants first. We just kind of have that daily routine, those everyday familiar tasks. But those that have cognitive impairment, they'll start to have difficulty doing those things that were once familiar. And a great example of this is if somebody was able to make a dish in the kitchen for years by memory, but now all of a sudden they can't even follow instructions on a recipe, their food starts to taste really off, that could be a sign. The number 4 sign and symptom is confusion with time or place. A person might not realize where they are, or they might start to become more easily disoriented. A good example of this is getting lost on their drive home from a familiar place. If they always used the same route to get home from work every day, and all of a sudden more often they're taking wrong turns or end up in a place that doesn't seem familiar, again, cause for concern. We need to start cluing into these to see if there's a pattern. Halfway through our list at number 5 is trouble understanding visual images and spatial relations. Often, the disease impacts the part of our brain that helps us with their awareness of our surroundings. So if you start to see someone having difficulty with balance and walking, maybe they're tripping more often, maybe they're having issues with vision and having trouble with things like reading, that is an early sign. The number 6 sign is new problems with words in speaking and writing. For example, if they're not able to recall words, or you find them often searching for the right word, or they start to substitute other words for the word they can't think of, or maybe they just describe the word instead of say the word. If you start to see patterns with that, patterns and challenges in that area, that could be a sign and symptom that there's something going on. We need to get to the doctor. The number 7 sign is misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace steps. I mentioned the keys earlier. I don't know how many times I've lost my car keys or my cell phone or my sunglasses, but eventually I'm able to kind of track back in my mind. Oh, okay, I came in, I put my purse here, I put the groceries here, maybe I left my sunglasses by the groceries, that sort of thing. But someone living with dementia, they're likely not able to retrace those steps. And that's why you see things like car keys in the freezer. They put them there and they can't remember that that's where they left them. And then the number 8 sign is decreased or poor judgment. And in these instances, the individual may make decisions that are out of character or seem irrational. For example, typically we see this, happen in a person's finances. They might start taking out excessive amounts of money, giving money away to every charity that sends them a donation letter in the mail, or maybe they start to make some, kind of crazy investment in their area of financials. It's these types of decreased or poor judgment, again, that become a pattern, and they start to be a sign that maybe there's some cognitive impairment going on. The number 9 sign, we're almost through this list of 10 here. Number 9 is withdraw from work and social activities. The person may start to notice these changes in themselves, and they might not want others to notice. So you might just start to see them withdraw. Maybe it's that they stop going to their book club or Bible study. Maybe they start to skip out on any social work and activities like happy hour that they used to really enjoy going to. So it's changes in those kind of social patterns. Anytime that they're starting to withdraw, maybe that's one of the signs that there's something else going on. And then last but not least, number 10, changes in mood and personality. Especially if the person has a drastic mood change for seemingly no reason. that's when there should be some kind of heightened awareness. Maybe there's cause for concern here. In some kind of rare cases, it could be due to an infection like a UTI. It could be an early sign of Alzheimer's or another type of dementia. I listened to a podcast recently where a husband and wife were sharing about their dementia journey. And the husband was having these drastic mood swings, and that led the couple to actually separate. They started living apart. But they kind of went through this whole diagnostic journey, and they found out he actually had dementia. And once they had that diagnosis, it cleared up so much, and they ended up moving back in together, and they almost felt a relief knowing, okay, there was a cause behind that drastic change in personality or mood swings. So, with these signs and symptoms, a one-off, a one-time occurrence might not be concerning, but if you start to see patterns of a few of these signs, you want to start keeping track of this. You want to make a visit to the person's healthcare provider. And some people are very nervous or resistant to get a diagnosis, which I can understand, but it's so important for several reasons. And I want to tell you why. First, it might not be dementia. And so if you go seek healthcare, and go seek out a healthcare provider, they might determine it's something else like a vitamin deficiency or a urinary tract infection, a UTI, like I mentioned earlier. And in those cases, those things are treatable, reversible. And again, it might not be dementia. But it's also important that if it is some type of dementia, that the family kind of knows about it, they're able to learn about it, and they're able to plan ahead for the future and still engage that individual in the decision-making, in the planning, while they're still cognitively able to do so. And finally, another reason to go in for a diagnosis is that there are some treatment options available that can help to slow the progression of the disease or treat the symptoms. And it's really important to get a diagnosis earlier rather than later, especially because some of those treatments are most effective in the earlier stages of dementia. And I do want to be transparent that getting a diagnosis, it can take some time. They often run a lot of tests. They want to rule out a lot of things. They also most likely will give you a referral to a specialist like a neurologist or geriatric doctor. And so just know that if your journey to diagnosis is taking a while, it's not outside the norm. Okay, so now that we've talked about the early signs and symptoms, I want to talk more about the dementia-related behaviors that tend to show up more in that middle stage of Alzheimer's. But before I do, first we're going to hear a word from our sponsor. This podcast is brought to you by Home Instead, an honor company. If you find yourself needing extra support as a family caregiver or time away from your caregiving responsibilities, Home Instead can help. Our home care services are delivered by compassionate care professionals and range from personal care, meal preparation, and medication management to Alzheimer's care and hospice support. Visit homeinstead.com to learn more and to find a location near you. I'm going to briefly cover 7 different dementia-related behaviors that we commonly see among those living with dementia. This is something we start to see more of as a person moves into the second stage of the disease, that middle stage. But it's not just exclusive to that stage. Every person living with dementia is different. Some will experience all 7 behaviors. Some will just experience a few. If you've heard this phrase before, if you met one person with dementia, you've met one person. It's so true. Each person is different. And the key is trying to understand what dementia-related behaviors they're exhibiting and the meaning behind it. Sometimes we have to put on a detective's hat and find out the why behind the behavior, because a lot of times it's an expression of an unmet need. And if we can anticipate that person's need, we might be able to prevent the behavior from occurring in the first place, or at least help us kind of learn the best ways to respond. So let's go over those 7 common dementia-related behaviors now. The first is repetition and fixation. And this behavior is one that seems to be pretty familiar to people. It kind of seems like an obvious sign. An individual might become hooked on a topic or continually ask a question. They repeat themselves. We often associate that with dementia, don't we? A repeating of questions and words. And sometimes people do this to soothe themselves, or they might be trying to express a specific concern. And it's very likely that the person does not know that they keep asking the same question or repeating the same action. So they're not trying to do this on purpose. They're not trying to be annoying. I know it can be annoying to us as the care partner or caregiver, but remember, it's the result of the deterioration that's happening in their brain. And so it can be really helpful to answer their question like it's the first time they asked it. Again, I know this is easier said than done because these questions can get very annoying, but you can also come up with some sort of visual aid to help the person remember. So for example, if they're always asking, what day is it? What time is it? What's the temperature outside? When is lunch? Maybe you find a digital clock that has the date and the temperature outside. And so every time they ask that question, you can point to the clock or keep it prominently displayed in an area of the home that they're in a lot. So maybe it can help to reduce the number of times that they ask those questions. So again, you have to kind of get creative, put on that detective's hat and try a few different things. The next dementia-related behavior that we often see is anxiety and agitation. And when we talk about anxiety and agitation, there's often an action that is related to it, such as like pacing back and forth, rocking, restlessness, even throwing an object, and so forth. And these actions, they can be due to a lot of things. It might be that the person is frustrated. Maybe they're in an unfamiliar place, or there's something in the environment that's agitating, like maybe there's a loud noise. And it could also be due to boredom or a lack of social interaction. So engaging a person in meaningful activities and things that they enjoy can be a great way to help redirect from that anxiety or agitation. Sometimes it's also our approach that can make an impact. We're going to be talking all about the approach to dementia care in the next episode of Caregiver Chats. And I've also linked to some helpful videos in the show notes. Okay, the third dementia-related behavior is refusal. And refusal can be verbal or nonverbal. And in this instance, the person's indicating that they don't want to do something, and we need to discover why. Common reasons for refusal often include things like a lack of understanding in what they're being asked to do. Think about it. If a person came up to you and handed you a medication and said, "Take this," you probably would be having some questions. I know I would. Like, what is this medication for? Is it legal? All those kinds of things. And so, think about it. If you approach a person living with dementia and tell them to take a medication and they don't know what it's for, they might be telling you no. And so simple things like saying, "Hey, I need you to take this pill. It's for your back. It's going to help make your back feel a lot better." Or, "This pill is for your heart, to keep your heart nice and strong." It can be a simple way to help them understand why you're asking them to do something. And another reason they often refuse is out of a desire to remain in control and to make decisions for themselves. And in these cases, you can try giving them some simple options, or letting them do as much as they can on their own as possible before jumping in and taking over. All right, so the fourth dementia-related behavior is delusions and hallucinations. And these are actually two separate things. So a delusion is a fixed false idea. It's a distortion of reality, but to the person with dementia, it's a very real situation. So an example of this, an example of a delusion would be, "Someone stole my purse," or "Someone's in the house and they're trying to hurt me." Okay, so that's what a delusion is. A hallucination, on the other hand, is a false perception of objects or events. So they may see, hear, smell, taste, or feel something that isn't there or that isn't real. So for example, they may see kids playing outside and you look out there and you're like, "There's no one there." They may think that they hear a dog barking, but it's actually just the AC vent kicking on. And so for caregivers, delusions and hallucinations, it can be alarming. Sometimes it can catch you off guard. It can kind of freak you out a little bit. But it's important to evaluate these situations. Are they impacting the person? Is it making them upset? Do you need to kind of reassure them that they're safe? Or is it just something that you can kind of acknowledge and move on from? And so, again, there's another great video in the show notes that has more information on delusions and hallucinations. I hope you'll check it out. Not something that everyone experiences in their dementia journey, but for some that are experiencing it, it can be helpful to have those tips. All right, so the fifth dementia-related behavior is anger and aggression. And this can be verbal or physical. Physical aggression can be especially scary for caregivers, and verbal aggression can really just wear you down over time and be really disheartening. But it's important in these instances to keep yourself and the person that you're caring for safe. If possible, you might need to leave the room to allow the individual to cool off. We often see anger or aggression as a result of things like physical discomfort or pain, environmental factors, frustration, and also poor communication. So again, put that detective hat on. You want to figure out what's contributing to this situation. You want to try to identify the immediate cause of their anger and aggression, and you want to try to redirect or de-escalate in the very first signs of anger and aggression so we avoid having kind of a buildup. And in the show notes, again, you'll find a video. I have some great videos with tips out there that can help you with these instances of anger and aggression. Again, it can be very scary. But there are things we can do to hopefully get ahead of it and mitigate it as much as possible. The second to the last behavior is a bit of a taboo subject, but it's an important one to address because it does happen and not a lot of people talk about it. So I definitely want to bring it up in this podcast. So this dementia-related behavior is sexual expressions and inappropriateness. All of us have needs and wishes for friendship and belonging, companionship, intimacy, and the expression of our sexuality. And that does not go away for those living with dementia. And a symptom of dementia could include personality changes in which the person can become less inhibited and can cause them to kind of lose their filter, if you will. And so it's important to keep in mind that these sexual expressions, while they may seem inappropriate, the person might not understand why they're inappropriate in the circumstances that they're in. For example, an individual might mistake his daughter to be his wife and maybe touch her on the bum or say something inappropriate in that context. But again, he thought it was his wife. And it could also be something that you don't expect that's not kind of sexually related at all. You don't want to jump to conclusions. It could be that they're grabbing at their private areas because they're in pain or they're experiencing discomfort. They might exhibit these behaviors also out of confusion, anxiety, or distress. They might also feel lonely and feel a need for love, affection, and physical touch. And in those instances, can you find appropriate ways to provide more hugs or maybe hand holding or massaging their hands with lotion or something of that sort? Because again, we all have that longing to connect. And it also could be out of understimulation or boredom. So if you can keep the individual engaged in meaningful activities that are appropriate, then you might start to see less of this behavior exhibited in the individual. And again, I have another great video in the show notes that I've linked to on this topic of sexual inappropriateness. Again, not always easy to talk about, but for some, it is a reality. And so I want you to have resources and information at your fingertips. The final dementia-related behavior that I wanted to cover is wandering. All right, let's think about this and put it into a little bit of perspective. We all have the tendency to wander. Have you ever felt restless or bored and gone out for a walk or jumped in your car and gone for a drive? Like, have you just needed to get out of the house and clear your head? There are times when most people want to just kind of wander or walk about. People with dementia are no different. It can help them relieve stress and boredom, and it's good exercise. Walking is not a problem itself. However, it can be worrying if you're supporting a person with dementia who often wanders. And the term wandering, I think, is kind of unhelpful because it suggests the person's walking without a purpose. But the reality is there's usually a purpose behind it. There's usually a reason behind it. Again, we need to put on that detective hat and try to understand why the person is wandering. In the early stages of the disease, wandering is often more so due to disorientation. So they might find themselves lost in a familiar place. If you've seen the movie Still Alice, there's a scene where she goes for a run. It's like the same run she's done every day or every week for years and years. And all of a sudden, she finds herself completely lost. So in that instance, she didn't set out to wander. She just became disoriented. And then in later stages, often an individual wanders because they're looking for something. They're trying to go somewhere, or they're trying to seek out an unmet need like hunger or the need to use the restroom. So again, you have to think about, okay, what's the purpose behind the wandering? And maybe you can find safe ways to create an environment where the individual can wander, again, in a very safe way. I have another great video with some more tips on wandering in the show notes, and so I hope that you'll check that out. That wraps up all 7 common dementia-related behaviors. I hope it's helpful to know a little bit more about these behaviors and some ways to address them. And next, I want to share some caregiver insights with you because it can be so helpful to learn from those who have gone before us. On our Remember for Alzheimer's Facebook page, we often ask our followers questions about their caregiving journey. I encourage you to like and follow the page. There's some great discussions and tips that are shared on that website. You can find the link in the show notes, or you can just search Facebook for Remember for Alzheimer's. So I would love to share with you some of the responses we had to a recent question. And the question was, what is one thing you wish others knew about your caregiving journey? And as I was reading through the many, many responses, 6 themes emerged. I want to share those with you, again, because we can learn so much from those that come before us. So the first lesson that they shared is that the role is challenging but rewarding. One caregiver said, and I quote, "It was a very hard time, but I would do it all over again. My dad deserved the 8 years I dedicated to his care." Another said, and I quote, "It was beautiful and emotionally challenging at the same time. It was an honor and a privilege to spend so much time with my mother when she developed dementia. There were many amazing moments when she and I would sing together and she knew every word. It's hard to know how much was gone and how much was still there. I believe she understood that she could not express herself in that moment, and then the moments were gone, and we just moved on to the next moment together. It was a very special time for me." I just love those direct quotes from these caregivers. Again, that role, while it can be challenging to be a caregiver or care partner, it can be so rewarding. The second theme that emerged in this question is that it's really hard to witness them forget. As individuals progress through the disease, they often forget the names of their loved ones, which is absolutely heartbreaking. On our Facebook group, one caregiver said, "It was hard to come to grips with the fact that my mom didn't know who I was any longer." I think it's important for caregivers to know that while they may not remember your name, they will often recognize you as someone familiar and comforting. I love the Maya Angelou quote where she says, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." So caregivers, if you are in that point in the kind of disease progression where your loved one has forgotten your name, just know that they will never forget how you make them feel. So I hope that's comforting to you. The third theme that emerged from this Facebook response to the question, what do I hope every caregiver knows about the caregiving journey is, it's easy to feel isolated, but don't do it alone. Many caregivers shared that can be really easy to feel lonely and to become isolated, but they provided reminders that you don't have to do it alone. and there's a lot of resources out there to help you. So one caregiver shared, love your parent and do what you can, but you can't do it alone. Ask for respite. I've shared an article in the show notes about the benefits of respite care, especially for dementia caregivers. And home care, like the services we provide at home, and said it's a great source of respite and support. So I've linked to a home care guide in the show notes that you might find helpful as you look into home care for that extra support. And one resource that will also help you hopefully feel less isolated is support groups. I have facilitated support groups in the past and have seen firsthand how impactful they can be for family caregivers. It allows them to connect and to share with one another. And many of the respondents to this Facebook question talked about the importance of support groups and how they have found meaning in support groups and support. And so I provided some links in the show notes to Hilarity for Charity, or HFC. They have some great support groups. And then there's also the Alzheimer's Association. They also have great support groups online and in person. Okay, so the number 4 theme is that it takes a lot of patience. The caregiving role can become easily frustrating at times, and many caregivers shared that patience is really important. One caregiver said, "We learned the real meaning of patience. My husband and I took care of my mother-in-law for the last 6 years of her suffering with Alzheimer's. It was not easy, but we experienced so many beautiful and special moments. Like when it was Christmas, 3 months before her passing. She couldn't remember my son's or my name, but surprisingly, she remembered most of the lyrics to I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas. I video recorded her, and it was one of those moments that I'll never forget." What a special memory for that caregiver. Another caregiver shared in regard to patience that you wake up to a different personality every day. You need to be flexible with the way you are caregiving daily. So that patience and flexibility, it's a big part of being a caregiver, and it can be hard. And sometimes you just need to pause and take 3 deep breaths before you kind of reapproach the caregiving situation. But that patience will help get you a long way. Okay, I have 2 more tips from these caregivers, and the next is to accept where they are in their journey. It can be really easy to hang on to the person that they once were, especially as we start to see the disease progress and parts of the person fade away. It's very natural to grieve loss in real time. There's actually a term for this called ambiguous loss. That's a topic for another podcast. But when you're experiencing that loss, you're grieving somebody who's still there. But caregivers shared that it's helpful to accept where that person is on their journey. A caregiver said, "Love them where they are. Stop wishing you had her back. She's still there, just different." She had to do that with her beautiful mom. She said, "I told a friend when I learned this that it was so much easier, and it helped her too." So for some caregivers, coming to that place of acceptance and learning about that ambiguous loss can help them better live in the moment and be present for their loved one. I do have a video on ambiguous loss that I linked to in the show notes, so if you're interested in learning more, I would encourage you to do so. And the final theme from these caregivers who have gone before us in their caregiving journey is that it's important to cherish the special moments. Amidst all the challenges, the loss, and the sadness, many caregivers share that there are these special moments that really do need to be cherished. One caregiver said, "Remember to love and to laugh. Enjoy the good days and make them last." Another said, "Enjoy every smile and hug. Don't worry if your loved one doesn't know you or make sense." So again, cherish those special moments because they do happen. And if you're able to be present and live in the moment with them, hopefully you can capture even more of those cherished, precious moments. So I hope that you found these 6 tips helpful as you reflect on your own caregiving journey. And if you have more tips to add, please email me. I'd love to hear from you. My email is caregiverchats@homeinsteadinc.com. So that wraps up this episode all about the signs and symptoms of Alzheimer's and dementia. And I hope that you now have a better understanding of the differences between the two. I also hope that you continue to learn about Alzheimer's and any other type of dementia that might be impacting the person you care for. Education is power, and knowing about the disease and how to best care for someone with it can help you be a better caregiver or care partner. There are so many links in the show notes for this episode. Sorry to overwhelm you, but again, I wanted you to have as much information and resources as possible. And finally, you don't have to travel this caregiving journey alone. The next 2 episodes of Caregiver Chats, I'm also going to share more about Alzheimer's and dementia, so I really hope that you will tune in and continue to learn along your caregiving journey. Our next episode, it's going to be a bonus episode, spoiler alert. I'll be talking with the CEO of the Alzheimer's Association, Dr. Joanne Pike. She and I will talk about the latest in Alzheimer's research. She's also going to talk about the supports and resources offered by the Alzheimer's Association, so you won't want to miss it. You can also, again, send me your questions, any tips and caregiving stories as it relates to Alzheimer's and dementia. You can email me at caregiverchats@homeinsteadinc.com. Again, that's caregiverchats@homeinsteadinc.com. I also invite you to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Home Instead Inc. Again, that's Home Instead INC for previews of upcoming episodes, caregiving tips, and more. You can find all the links in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and please remember to take good care of yourself while you care for others. Caregiver Chats is brought to you by Home Instead. If you're looking for in-home care to support you on your caregiving journey, please visit homeinstead.com/caregiverchats to learn more.